former Reagan economic advisor Art Laffer, Cato director of tax policy studies Chris Edwards. I don't know. I know we all, toe a political line when judging these things. You try not to, but I found that Art to be a bit of a stretch. Because you can always look at things in the eye of the beholder, and a political document, as these budgets invariably tend to be. But he was really getting at with Maria Bartiromo, that is Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary, the assumptions on which it was based. And he was the guy who came with very generous assumptions during the Clinton boom years that built in very generous assumptions, assuming they would last, and they didn't. I don't know. I just find it a little galling. You?
Yeah, I sure do, but not because of his forecasting more optimistically historically. He's just wrong now. He is the author of what is called the new normal, Neil. The new normal is that the U.S. is caught in this horrible consumption expenditure, no way out trap, and we're going to grow at 1%, 2% for the next 4,000 years.
And it's the best we can do.
All the people are going to die after they lose enormous amounts of weight. It's the best we can do. The reason this happens, of course, is because of Obama's taxes, or because of the stimulus spending by both W and Obama. And once we reverse those, this thing has no place to go but up. I think 3% is, if anything, a little bit too modest.
You know, the one thing that stands out in this, Chris, and again, you could pick apart all budgets. I always fault those that don't look for reining in growth in all budgets, including for Republicans who don't want to touch a $600 billion defense program to try to look for cost overruns or containment there. Having said that, though, is this a draconian budget to you? Is the Medicaid cutting that's going on here, even though net it's going to have more money going to Medicaid over 10 years than would be the case, period, is that draconian to you?
No, look, this is the most fiscally conservative budget since Ronald Reagan, but I don't think that's draconian. It means I think it's compassionate and pro-growth. I'll give you two strong themes in the budget. One of them is the idea of federalism, that more of the costs of Medicaid and food stamps ought to be put on state governments, because if the federal government pays all the money for these programs, the states tend to waste it. So we can have smaller programs that are more efficient if states run them. A second theme that Director Mulvaney has talked about a lot is getting millions of people off the sidelines who are not working into the workforce. And so, for example, reforms for Social Security disability insurance, that program has put many people on the sidelines who want to work, who want to get into the workforce, but they have a disincentive to. That program needs to be reformed, and many people with moderate disabilities can get back into the workforce. That would be good for everyone and good for the overall economy.
You know, Art, I'm looking at some of the so-called callous assumptions that have been built into this budget, or Chuck Schumer saying that it takes a sledgehammer to the middle class. The fact of the matter is, this budget, in fact, in the latest year, north of $4 trillion, is the biggest budget any U.S. president or any leader anywhere on earth has ever submitted, ever. But it's up from $2.8 trillion as recently as 2007. Total spending over those 10 years is going to be north of $53 trillion. The so-called cuts, totaling about $3.6 trillion, amount to barely 6.5% of that. We're showing a Medicaid spending chart that shows it's slowing the rate of increase. It's not reversing it. What do you make of that?
Well, you're right on that, of course. But Chris's point, I think, is really the serious one here, is we need to get growth, and budgets create growth or they destroy growth. I was the first chief economist at the OMB when it was formed, Neil. And, when you look at these budget things, if you pay people not to work and tax them if they do work, do not be surprised if you find a lot of people not working. And what Chris is saying is bring the people back into the labor force, and then you could be like John F. Kennedy, which I can quote here: the best form of welfare is still a good, high-paying job. And I wish Chuck Schumer would understand that. He does everything, not with static accounting, he does it with stagnant accounting.
But I think he knows, he's a smart man. I think Chuck Schumer knows how idiotic this argument is and how unsustainable an entitlement program growing at a 9.7% clip, that when you bring it down to growing at a 6% clip, that is hardly draconian. But this is the world in which we live, Chris. So where do you see this going? If this budget is deemed by even the likes of prominent Republicans is dead on arrival. What are we going to get?
No, I think that, you know, the main themes here will be pushed pretty strongly by Trump and his budget advisor. The idea of putting costs back on the states, getting people back into the workforce, cutting out a lot of the fraud and waste of in these programs. You know, the Earned Income Tax Credit program, which Trump would cut, the fraud rate is 25%, which is absolutely remarkable. So, you know, a lot of these cuts have nothing to do with compassion. They have to do with good government, frankly. So, and, you know, by the way, the last president doubled the national debt from 10 to 20 trillion. There's nothing compassionate about pushing all those costs onto young Americans in the future. So I'm glad Trump has as a goal to eliminate the deficit. The deficit is not compassionate. It pushed costs onto young people, which is totally unfair.
You know, and we should be thinking, right, Art, a budget is one that's borne by the people who have to pay for it. And too often we forget that. And I think it would be a good reminder, Republicans and Democrats alike, to know everything costs money. And it is on you, the taxpayer, that responsibility lies. So we forget that it's all about someone getting something and not about the people who keep paying something.
Yeah, it's a double entry accounting system. There's someone who receives it, and there's someone who pays for it. And that's all true. But then when you come down to the bottom line, Neil, the only times we've ever had budget balances, Clinton under Kennedy, is after enormous economic growth. The only way to balance the budget is economic growth. And you don't get economic growth by taxing people who work and produce. You cannot tax an economy into prosperity. And frankly, a poor person can't spend himself into wealth either. It's silly. And what Chris is saying is exactly the right thing. The Earned Income Tax Credit is a farce. It's a hoax. It doesn't really work. Jobs, create good, high-paying jobs, and you'll get all of these people doing very, very well.
Yeah, well, the bottom line is we haven't the guy who's doing gangbusters under the type of way we do budgeting now. So we could try some changes. I didn't know that about you, Art, about the OMB economist
You
thing.
didn't?
No, I did not. But now, how did President Lincoln treat you well? I mean,
Oh my God! Oh my God!
I just had to.
Yes,
I just
you
had
did.
to. Thank you, my friend. Very good job, guys, just looking at the pros and cons of this. Chris Edwards as well, the Cato Director of Tax Studies. Art Laffer, of course, who served Abraham Lincoln very, very well. That's beyond doubt now. All right, meanwhile, Senator Mitch McConnell, in case you didn't hear, says the Senate lacks votes on